All right, well, let's get into it. Welcome to our very first installment of Fishing and Talking with Djii and Kahs. Maybe it'll become more of a thing. Maybe it'll change over the many years that this show will run for, obviously,
I
right?
mean, clearly, this is going to be the greatest show on YouTube and the Twitch stream. So
Right. Move aside Bellular and Bajira, and you know all the streamers, and I don't. So you fill that in.
Talia,
We'll record that later.
Nevatel, Sloopeg,
Yeah,
Automatic
yeah. Move
Jack.
aside. Oh,
Make room.
they're all so good. Anyway, so we're gonna kind of pick a topic and kind of go with it. Before we get into that first, though, I think it would be useful for us to review some of the more recent news briefly of WoW, and by news, the goings-on, the happenings, which obviously would have to include the 8.0 pre-patch. Battle for Azeroth is not live, but our 8.0 is, right?
Yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, BFA is live. It's just none of the new expansion content's available because it's locked behind the quest. But we are running on the Battle for Azeroth system, as far as I understand it, with all of its architecture and whatnot from the software side. So
Right, so that means the stat squishes, the talent changes, classes and everything updates, and also a whole slew and mess of bugs. What was it? It's been 2 weeks now since we dropped 8.0, almost two
this is
weeks
week
or a week
week
and a
three,
half.
right? Because we
Week
had
three?
the stat squish week with no lore. We had the first part, and now we have the second part of the Birding a Teldrassil scenario. So
Yes,
this
that's right.
this is week three.
So this is week
But yeah,
three.
what you're talking about
Week two of
with
our
the
story.
pre-patch launch and the gigantic debacle that everybody was freaking out about, like it
Eesh.
wasn't pretty, but obviously better now than with the global launch that they've got planned. And it's not surprising, I suppose, because like you mentioned, we got the stat squish, so every single item, boss, and character in the game had to be retuned. We had
Yeah.
war mode, which meant that PvP and PvE servers are no longer a thing. So there was
hmm
massive changes to server infrastructure. Um,
And sharding and
yeah, and
stuff, right?
sharding. Since I think the only delineation between servers now is RP servers get their own shards, and then there's everyone else. Um, and then you added obviously all the new items and new stuff for BFA, like we talked about, and it kind of creates its own issues. But
Own
yeah,
challenges for sure. But I think you're totally right. I mean, like, that's the whole point of the pre-patch, and I think one of the reasons they do it is because of that, especially with what seems to me a pretty ambitious worldwide launch, which is the first time they're ever doing that, right? Correct me if
yeah,
I'm
it's the first
wrong,
time
but
they're doing it.
that's
I think it's less ambitious than it sounds up front because the European like servers, the American servers are completely separate entities. Um, all the I guess the ambitious part is if something goes wrong, they have to service numerous servers at once instead of being able to focus on US launch, focus on EU launch, focus on Oceanic or
mhm,
whatever as they slowly roll it out. It's
right. Roll
the
it
shit
out.
hits the fan for everyone at once. So if it's broken, then they're gonna have
Yeah.
to do massive like fixes instead of creating or using NA as their test bed like they did this time around, where everything was broken and we didn't get to play basically until the European launch on Wednesday for them. So
Right. Right. I'm interested to see how that goes, honestly. I tend to be more of a kind of I'll forgive, technical issues like that because it's a massive game with a massive player base, and especially with all of the changes that were going into it. It is funny though to see kind of the fallout of the dregs, the leftovers of kind of the bugs and the patches and whatnot. Like we were rating this week, we were doing Portal Keeper, right? And it seems like still those pods are just like wrecking us. Or today I was questing an old Hyjal, and I don't know if this has anything to do with pre-patch stuff, but like just getting like all kinds of weird little bugs. But there's like, what did Ian say? Millions, like literally just like millions and millions of lines of code, but then just like thousands of bugs that have been submitted to cover. So it's been interesting to see it get tuned up over the weeks, I guess.
interesting. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, like obviously we're running into stuff as we go, and you kind of have to just deal with whatever kind of
Right.
comes and goes. And it's almost it's kind of funny that Blizzard's plagued by their own success because previous launches have been so successful. It
Oh
like
man, Legion was
yeah,
amazing,
it creates
right?
this weird like thing where you run into problems or something. But I don't know, like any bug, everybody freaks out and everybody wants to blame Blizz. But
Right.
ultimately, this was I think the bigger patch was now, and then hopefully the launch will be fairly smooth because a lot of the stuff is being ironed out as we speak. And they did that Q&A shortly after, which seemed to actually address, and they were like, hey, obviously not what we wanted, we're sorry, we're working on it. They put up forums to try to stuff or fix stuff, and I think they've been fairly upfront about a lot of their changes and have been fairly responsive, I guess, in terms of trying to identify and fix issues as they
Yeah.
come up. So they're at least
Yeah.
listening, and they've got a lot going on. But
You're right. Right. Yeah. Unless you're one of the kind of tinfoil hat people who have fun theories we could talk about for a long, long time, but we shan't today. But it is an interesting topic that I'm thinking about that we could talk at another time. And just kind of the expectations from Blizzard, from the player base,
certainly,
just what we expect from them and how fast we expect it. And I think that's an interesting topic. But there is a little bit more news from this week, of course, with the War of Thorns campaign, but I can't remember what is it. Maybe this giant burning tree
yeah,
we're staring at.
spoilers.
Oof. Spoiler. The tree is burnt. That's not a spoiler if you've been at all involved in
Yeah,
Warcraft for the
if
last, what, eight
if you
months?
watched the BlizzCon announcement for the game, you saw that picture, so you knew it was
Yeah,
coming.
right. Right, absolutely. But it was revealed this week for sure who did it, who started it after the much kind of teased, kind of hyping of the mystery of it all. So it was Sylvanas, right?
Yeah, go figure. Surprise, surprise. The morally gray Sylvanas, who is charging ahead and burning down a tree for seemingly non
Personal reason?
tactical reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about this, and I know we've talked about this off stream a little bit, but you know, it's interesting now, like looking across the internet and seeing people's reactions between streamers, players, forums, and like just how upset. And even in our own guild, that was kind of interesting today, where we have some people who just like, hey, I totally get it. I loved it. I was ready to go. And I know I personally, it just feels to me like I don't mind that she did it. Let's be clear about
Oh no.
that. I think like, hey, you want to burn the tree down? Like, why wasn't that the goal from the beginning? Or at the very least, like, why doesn't she up the ante and just be proud of that whole thing? But like, I mean, again, there's a whole bunch more story to come out, but it's definitely not looking like that a morally gray expansion is going to transfer over to our faction leaders. It seems pretty clear to me that like Sylvanas is kind of doing bad things because she's doing them.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
gotta. I mean, for my 2 cents, I guess I was pretty disappointed with the thing because even though like everybody's like, well, it wasn't the obvious solution because people were thinking, Greymane or thinking there's gonna be Jaina or Ajara or something like that.
There was even some Anduin. I'd read some
It
stuff
was
that Anduin would do it.
everyone was saying not Sylvanas because they said it wasn't who you would think it would be, and Sylvanas was the obvious choice. So you were basically baited into thinking someone else. They're like, surprise!
Yeah, yeah,
But she's like again, like I've got no issue, for the horde. Let's burn that mother down. But like, yeah, the reasoning behind it, if you watch the cutscene, is questionable at best, in my opinion. It kind of
yeah,
pigeonholes you into kind of a weird place where if you're a diehard Horde fan but you don't love Sylvanas and you don't love the story she's taking, there's not a lot of wiggle room. And even like Garrosh,
yeah,
which is not, at least I don't think, received as being a particularly amazing set of content and lore. At least
yeah.
there was like murmurs of rebellion and like collusion with,
Right,
with the
right.
alliance and stuff to basically overthrow him. But here you've got Sarfang who's like, oh, I'm dishonorable, but doesn't actually seem to care.
What
Like
does it
still
do
doing
anything
everything, and
about
the
it? Yeah,
Thanos that just doesn't care. And Bane is absent completely.
yeah, yeah,
Trey Prince Scallywix only cares about money. Like it's
yeah.
just
It's hard to find like a place in the horde if you're not, you know, all for Sylvanas and and doing this stuff because like your leaders haven't really done anything about it
Yeah,
yet,
and
I guess.
yeah, like I want to say, well, maybe this will be cleared up in the actual expansion, and that's possible, I suppose. But without like giving anything too much away, having played through most of the
Right.
beta, from what I saw, and maybe things have changed since I've leveled because it has been a while, but it feels kind of like there's this big like dark cloud that's put over Sylvanas here in the pre-patch stuff, and then it just kind of gets forgotten, like going into
Right.
the beginning
It's
parts of the expansion. So it's I'm curious to see where they go. Blizzard usually does pretty good storytelling, so I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but I am terrified to say the least. As a huge Sylvanas fan and a
yeah.
big horde guy, like I'm worried.
So we're gonna get Raid Boss
Oh, if they
Sylvanas.
Garrosh her, there's gonna be riots. Like
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
honestly can't do that. They can kill her,
No.
but it can't be the players that kill her. It's gonna have to be something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
Otherwise they've lost their edge, and that could be the beginning of the end of
Right.
Warcraft, in my opinion. So
Yeah. We could go on and on about that for a long time, and then maybe one day that will be a topic as more is revealed. But I think we should get into our real topic for the day, which is now that we are in 8.0, we're moving on, leaving Legion behind, our artifacts. Although, of course, you've got the Netherlight Angler. Is that what it
yeah,
is?
well, yeah. According to Ian, I didn't have to sacrifice the power of my fishing pole to help cure the world, so it still works.
Yeah, well, I bet you could have. I think you just conveniently forgot to pull
I'm
it out,
actually
you know?
curious if I like went back and had this equipped, if the cutscene would have me like channeling into
Holding
the
up
fish.
the
Yeah,
angler?
it would be hilarious, but I don't think it would have worked. I don't know.
I think it'd be great. But now that we're coming to the end here of Legion, I think this is a good enough time as any to kind of give a recap and kind of our thoughts on Legion and how it went as an expansion, some of its systems, raids, and whatnot, and kind of do a little retrospective and review of what I personally think has been a pretty great expansion for me. But I don't know. I don't know how everyone else in the world feels about that, but I've definitely loved it as a player who mostly, I trialed during BC. I started during Lich King. I didn't hit max level until like Pandaria, and then I've, been through WoD and then this. So I'm not the diehard, whereas your experience is much different than mine. So that might be useful for people to
Yeah, I mean,
know.
I've had varying levels of dedication. I've played the game since vanilla, in some capacity or whatever. Vanilla, I was kind of didn't have a lot of time freshman year in college at the Air Force Academy, but I was still playing because I enjoyed it. Went into BC, that's that same time frame or whatever, and got a little more dedicated. Did some more hardcore raiding. Never cleared Black Temple, but found my way attuned to it. Um, and then on and off. Probably ICC was probably the most dedicated raid tier I did, and then didn't love Kata, didn't love Mists, really hated WoD, but still played through them and kind of stopped raiding because my guild basically stopped playing, and so I was an LFR raider through a lot of that because I wanted to see what was happening, but couldn't be bothered to dedicate the time it takes. But I think
Right.
that like you're saying, Legion being a pretty good expansion, I think the numbers kind of agree with that, and my own sentiment. Like I've jumped in headfirst and enjoyed a lot of it. The sub count, from what we know, even though they've stopped reporting official numbers, has gone up considerably. And I think they've fixed a lot of the shortcomings and brought back and made a lot of people happy. It hasn't been without its flaws, obviously,
No,
but
no.
it's been a breath of fresh air in comparison to what I would say was the disaster of Warlords and the disappointment of Cataclysm and Pandaria.
Yeah, right. Since Lich King, it's been kind of a rough. That was the peak, right? Like 12,000 or 12
Yeah,
million
I think
subs
so.
in Lich King, and then slowly
Yeah.
dropping, right? That's amazing. Honestly, from 12 million on down, it's amazing how many people still play the game personally. But I don't know. Let's start from, we got lots to talk about, but I think, the first thing that happens when we log into Legion, on day one is that we all go questing and whatnot. I personally really enjoy the questing experience in the game as a whole. I mean, you go from one quest to the next and learn those stories. So I don't know. Let's in review. What do you think of the questing experience, this
I mean,
expansion?
questing's never been bad, and like as much as I shit on warlords in general, like the leveling experience and the questing experience experience was quite enjoyable in Warlords of Draenor. Where that expansion fell completely flat was with the endgame content. But I think again, Legion did a good job in delivering in that aspect. The questing was fun. This is the first time I think where they actually allowed us to choose what zones we leveled in, right? Because as where before you
Yes,
had
yeah.
kind of here's
You
your
kind of were
here's your
shoehorned
first
in,
three
yeah.
levels and here's your next three levels and then you cap off in one of these zones and then here's an endgame one as where here you could choose between whether you want to go High Mountain, Stormheim, like Azuna or the other place. Valshara. Yeah,
Valshara,
Valshara. But
yeah.
like they all scaled as you went, and you were able to kind of experience and like do stuff, which I guess for the initial leveling experience isn't super impactful, other than like it spreads out the populace. So there's not
Right.
like I remember BC, you walk through the portal and every motherfucker is in one place, and it's impossible to get to kill your boars or whatever. So this kind
Right.
of this progression or whatever is great because it allows you to. Um, Kind of spread out and and the
Yeah.
phasing and stuff. The technology has made the leveling experience a lot better. What I really like about it though is for alts,
Oh yeah.
because like you're not stuck doing the exact same quest lines to do the exact same amount of XP to get you your max level. You
Yes.
can be like, hey, this alt I'm gonna level in Stormheim this time, and oh, I'm gonna go to High Mountain with this guy, and so it doesn't feel as redundant in the leveling experience, which
Yes,
is
when you're
great.
doing that. Yeah, and both you and I are known alt-aholics, as it were. You especially, well, as far as leveling, I love leveling them all. You're good on their professions and stuff. But that was a really nice thing to me, was just jumping in and having the opportunity to pick where I went on all 13 of those alts that I put up to
Yeah,
110. You know what I mean? So that was so much better. And from Draenor on up, I think it was cool that they, kept building on that kind of scaling idea, because you could stay in a zone in Draenor until you finished it, because they let, you advance in the level and the mobs all advanced as well. And then the whole scaling throughout I thought was so great, because, it's a social game, right? You want to play with your
yeah,
friends. And maybe I didn't get into the game, that day until a couple hours later, but you're still leveling and we can, party up and go, which I thought was so good. Such a nice change that they've now rolled out to the rest of the game, which I think is much needed as far as like, leveling up from beginning to end, from a story perspective, from a systems perspective, and especially from like, the whole point of why we're playing a game is it's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. We want to play with each other, so I thought that was a really great change, well implemented, that I definitely
well,
enjoyed
especially with the
taking advantage
introduction
of.
of allied races, like and the heritage
Oh yeah,
armor, like a lot of people are going back and finding themselves leveling again where they wouldn't otherwise because they've already got the alts they want maxed out. So
yeah,
by changing the leveling experience so that it actually scales and you can go, there's actually a reason to like stay in Hellfire Peninsula um, and see a quest chain to its conclusion, as opposed to where before you would do like two quest chains, two dungeons, and you'd already out leveled the
oh yeah.
zone, and
You'd be
now you're like,
gone.
or two, and you're
Yeah,
like, oh crap, and so you're just constantly deleting stuff from your quest log and
yeah,
going through. Like, you can actually see the story if you haven't experienced it in a while, or if you boosted a character, or if you're playing Alliance or Horde and you want to see the other side. Like, you can actually kind of play through it without just doing a bunch of gray no XP quests. So that's great for replayability in that respect.
absolutely. And it's been great because, like, I like the lore obviously, and I like to know the stories going on. But I did a lot of leveling on my Alliance tunes in the old days of just like, and the fun about it was just how fast can you do
Yeah.
it? Don't read the text, just do it, just get it done. And with the kind of the scaling, and they've made leveling take, well, not longer, but it is definitely longer than before, because it's not just an absolute joke of like putting on your looms and just like blowing everything up and being done, So I think that's
Oh
great.
yeah,
I think it
and
is.
speaking of the bugs with the patch or whatever, I know that there was a lot of stuff on the forums and people complaining about the length of leveling, and I think they put out a
Oh
new
yeah.
post today, yesterday, or recently saying that they've scaled level 40 to 100 or something like that to reduce the
Yeah,
XP or
like
something. So
14% less XP needed or
which is
something,
still funny
right?
to me because people are complaining about it, but like it was on Taliesin or Bella Yalars or somebody else's video where they made their fake blue
Yeah.
post and they're like, man, if you don't like this, you best not play Classic. Like it's like,
Because that's a ridiculous level
yeah,
grind back
yeah.
then. And those people probably wouldn't like it, I'm
It's
guessing,
certainly going to be
if it's
interesting when we do get to Classic, and that's not the talk of of today, but just as an
Right.
aside, like I think a lot of people are going to be shocked when they log in and they spend the entire day playing and log out at level 6. Like,
Right. Right. No kidding. That's gonna be a big change. That's a big change. To me, I've enjoyed the leveling process, but some people hate it. The question I have, and just kind of as a related aside here, is that, you mentioned the allied races, and to get that heritage armor, you got to go from 20 to 110 at
yep, no
least. I'm
boosts.
assuming it's going to be 120 with the new races, Magar, Orcs, and Dark Iron, and then eventually what, Sandalari and
I
Kultiran,
would
right?
assume so. I actually haven't looked into that.
Yeah, so I don't know about that, but that is a pretty, like, even starting at level 20 is nice because you can hop right into the dungeons. You don't have to do all of that, from a just design perspective or whatever. You don't have to create a bunch of, new starting zones for, it's good for Blizz. It means they can add more
Yeah,
races
yeah.
as at will. But the question I have and the thought I have is like that is a long way to go, like leveling
But
wise. Like, and I just did it on a Nightborn and a High Mountain.
it seems extreme, and I was thinking about that. But the reality is you only have to do that if you're looking to get a piece of transmog specific to that particular race. So like, if
Right.
you race change, you can absolutely like it's not like locked or whatever. So if I look at the racials and I've decided that I'm going to do my mythic rating and I absolutely need to be a Dark Iron Dwarf, or I need to be, a Coltiran or a Zandalari Troll or something like that. I can
Right.
pay for the race change with either my gold via the WoW tokens or with actual like US dollars, and I can go straight into that race as long as I've unlocked them via the allied race like quest chain and the rep and all that jazz. And there's nothing lost from a gameplay perspective. I just don't get that cosmetic. And so I don't
Yeah.
have a problem with that because again, like a lot of that stuff, mounts, transmog, any of that nonsense, like it's cosmetic stuff. It enhances your in-game like gameplay because you've got that lore and that immersion. You get the achievements, you get the prestige look with it or whatever. But the reality is it doesn't affect my ability to go into the new raid and perform.
Right.
Like if I want to do it, then yeah, it takes some time, but it's purely for a
But
cosmetic
in the
thing,
end,
so it's up to you.
I mean, I guess if you love that race enough to change to them, then you would be fine probably
Yeah.
doing that because you want to do that. And if you are playing, them from a purely numbers point of view, then you don't need any of that stuff to do it.
Well,
I see
it's a
what you mean.
pleasant change, I think, from the changes again from vanilla since I've played to now. There's been a lot of like increases in convenience, which some of them I totally don't mind, like the number of flight paths, the increased flying speed, and blah blah blah.
Hmm.
Like it
Hmm.
certainly from a quality of life perspective is nice. But there
Yeah.
is a lot of stuff that does feel kind of handed to you, or a lot easier than it used to be. So seeing
Yeah.
something go back where it's like, no, it's not really hard. I mean, like, how long did it take you to level? It's not that long.
No.
Um,
No, it wasn't,
but if
honestly,
you
in
want
the
this cool
end.
transmog or whatever that's specific to this race, you're just gonna have to dedicate some time, and that's all there is to it. And I think
Abs-
that's a pleasant change from some of the other changes that we've seen recently from Blizzard.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me. So I kind of had this feeling at the beginning. What was it? BlizzCon. You were there that year, 2016, 2017,
Uh, f-
2016, I think, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
2016, and I just kind of had this vibe from Ian Hazzikostas, new game director on this expansion, of kind of that vibe, that feeling again of returning to like some stuff isn't for everybody, which is interesting because I want to come back to that in a second. But like some stuff isn't for everybody. Like, just you don't get this stuff just because you play it,
Yeah.
right? Y- you get that it's a random drop. That's what the game's about. That's what's hard. And he's kind of a classic player too in some ways,
Well,
right?
yeah, in his
But
interview or whatever, he played the game ever long before he ever even got hired onto the team or whatever.
right,
So
yeah, that's right. I
he's
thought,
been playing.
yeah,
I think he said since open beta, like so before the
yeah,
game was
that's
like
amazing.
released. So like he's got a lot of experience and he understands the
Yeah,
gameplay. Like he's a player as much
yeah,
as a developer or whatever. And I want to give mad props to Ian because I think
me
he
too.
like I don't know if he's personally responsible for everything, but he came on at probably one of WoW's most dire hours. Like the
No
game
kidding.
was dying. Like if
Yeah.
Legion wasn't the success
No,
that it was,
that's not meme dying. That's not this game is dead. That means like literally it was
well,
just
at the end of Warlords, before Legion and stuff was announced, it was at like its lowest sub numbers since like the first year of its existence or whatever. It was
yeah.
bad, so bad that they stopped reporting the sub numbers because they were losing stock prices during their quarterly reviews.
That's when they
Like
switched to
well, yeah,
engagement, right? They called it
well, yeah, when you
engagement.
start looking at it and they're like, we're not going to tell this to our shareholders because it makes us look bad. That's when you know things are not great.
Little dire.
I'm interested that they haven't brought it back because, like, I'm sure they can boast some huge numbers, but I think they've changed out of the model and they don't want to appear wishy-washy. So it's probably a good
Yeah.
financial decision. But like, it was very telling when they're like, we're not going to give these numbers out anymore, and people are
Yeah.
speculating. And like, I had heard numbers as low as like 2 to 3 million active players, which seems extreme.
That is so
But when
low.
you were,
Yeah.
I mean, if you were playing at the time and you're looking at the number of people you run into, like from your server, like I'd walk around the capital. Then again, nobody was in their capital because everybody's stuck in their fucking garrison.
Yeah,
Because
there
it's
was
like
their garrisons. Yeah,
free shit in
kidding.
your garrison. But yeah, like you just didn't see people playing the game. It didn't feel like an
Yeah.
MMO. So whatever he and his team and the Warcraft team in general have done, they have saved a game that I honestly feel was on the brink of being canceled.
Yeah, it was kind of a dire situation. I do like that, and it's been can neat. I mean, because this game is old now, and it's been interesting to see how it has evolved for, a modern day audience and modern day gamers here in the 2010s. You know what I mean? Because it's not the same or not the same kind of people or
Well, yeah, I
gamers.
mean,
I think
when
there
it
still are
launched,
some of those
18-year-old
people,
Kahs was
but
excited and started playing, but now you get the 18-year-old that's coming in now, and times have changed. Like
yeah,
it
and they're
is.
not going to be like, what do I have to do? If it were vanilla still today, I don't think. I mean, I think it would stagnate.
I,
I think
I,
we're
I
excited about
think I
Classic.
think
I mean,
classic will do well, and I think if like a vanilla style game were to launch, I think it would do decent. But I don't think there's
yeah,
I don't think it would do as well as it did. It was so
yeah,
revolutionary for its time, and it's become the staple MMO. Like games like the Old Republic and some of the others have like popped up in Final Fantasy and have tried to give it a quote unquote run for its money. But I don't think anything has been even remotely as successful. And like everyone talks about the WoW killer, but I think as long as WoW is doing good, there will not be a WoW killer. Like
yeah.
Blizzard is going to be the WoW killer when they say we're not going to support this game anymore because
Exactly right, because they're going to move on to some other
well, yeah,
project.
when
Like
I
it's
have
the,
my
that's the
slash
legacy
played
having.
of like 300 days on this character alone, like I've got
Right.
I've invested a huge portion of my life into this tune, so it's
Yeah.
hard to be like, oh, new game, yeah, whatever, screw this guy. Like they've created
Yeah.
like so many memories and like emotions attached to like everything that's going on that like that in and of itself keeps a huge portion of the player base playing. But
Yeah. Interesting tangents there, and I love that. I love that. But yeah, I'm still thinking about that kind of Ian. Some stuff is for you and some is for
mhm.
not. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But so questing, I think we both agree. Uh, Good experiences, the flexibility of being able to choose the zones. I thought it was a variety of flavor too that you could go. I mean, I hate Azuna, but at least it was different than everything else, you
But
know?
I love the adaptations
Uh,
they made throughout the expansion too, because at first it felt a little
yeah.
grindy with alts and stuff between trying to build up rep and push your Suramar quest line and all that jazz. But they've
Hmm.
adapted a lot of it where they realized, hey, it's great for a first time playthrough, but some of it doesn't need to be done
Yes.
12 times. So making
I
certain
loved
things
that.
account bound and kind of going back to that model has been
Yeah.
huge for making you can make these long quest chains that are impactful and attune you to like dungeons or whatever, but then when you make it a
Right.
countdown, you're no longer obligated to do it on subsequent tunes. And so it makes
Yeah.
it feel better because now it's not a chore. It's, hey, I want to experience this. And then if you don't
Yes.
want to do it again, you don't have to. But there's rewards along the way.
Yeah.
So there's incentives to do so if you're willing to put the time in. I think that's been spot
So,
on by Blizzard.
yeah. Definitely more friendly toward alt people, which is nice. I like because that's part of the game for me. Is I like to try different stuff and see different stuff. So I think that's really really cool. So I'm happy about that. The one criticism I'd have, and this is not unique to Legion, it's just in general, is sometimes, when you get into these cool questing zones, cool stories that are happening, and not everything needs to always be connected to the grander narrative and stuff. But sometimes, you're in a quest zone, and that quest line story never wraps up, or it kind of leaves some questions open that come back later. That's just kind of, I think, a unique challenge to MMO storytelling in general, and also just, you know, So that's a very nitpicky thing for me. Like, obviously we've talked about the Stormheim thing as being kind of like a bit of a like kind of, oh, that was cool, but now what's next? And then we didn't finish up on that at all, which I thought was kind of a bummer. I thought Suramar did the absolute best of any of those zones, though. Kind of tying into that, feeling like that led straight into the raid. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, yeah, it was. Suramar was done really well, and a lot of people hated it at first, and I'm not exactly sure why. But
You think that was the rep grind? Was it just a rep grind problem that
I don't
people
know
just didn't
because the
like
rep.
having
I
to
mean,
do
like
the?
it didn't feel that bad to me, and yeah, I mean it was an attunement initially for the mythic only at the time Court of
Yeah.
Stars and Arcway. Which was great
To be
because
honest,
I
I
think a lot
liked
of
that.
people are like attunements. Oh my god! But like again, I mean, I'm old school, so I'm like attunement. Pff, that wasn't an attunement. That was like you just happen across these
No.
dungeons. Like, talk to me when you get
Yeah.
attuned for Black Temple. Like,
Yeah, exactly, right? I'm like, that's hardly attunement. And I liked it, honestly. I thought it was cool. Because you didn't, honestly, the grind was not that
no,
bad to get
no.
exalted. It was not bad. You did that thing once a day. And even if you didn't do it once a day, you had plenty of time to get it done before, like, I think they were mythic only, attunement only for months and months before they
Yeah,
said we're going to do a heroic
and
version,
granted, I pushed the pace a lot more than your casual player, but I feel like I was
Sure,
attuned
right.
in the first week or two, so it wasn't bad. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it was okay. I thought that was fine, but I thought it was a cool storyline that
yeah,
built into
yeah,
that.
yeah. I loved how it built into the raid and how everything progressed, and then especially for the horde, if you go through the quest chain to unlock the allied race there, like
Oh
it
yeah.
really felt like that story like fully developed and kind of came to a pretty
hmm
cool conclusion. The alliance, I
hmm
feel like got kind of gypped in that respect. I think the Void Elves could have been that with the whole like storyline with seeing
Ooh, don't get me
Illyria and
started on
Turellian and
those.
stuff like that. But I felt like that one fell pretty short. And so
Yeah,
as a Horde
yeah.
player, I'm like, yeah, fuck those guys. But honestly, if I was an Alliance player, I would have been kind of disappointed.
Yeah,
With
I'm the
their
alliance guy here
their
pretty
take or
much.
whatever. But
Yeah.
like I mean on not that that the High Mountain Tauren storyline was amazing, but the Nightborn one,
It made
it made
sense at
sense. But
least
yeah,
that we
the
were
Nightborn one
yeah.
felt very good because like you had been working with them the whole time, trying to
So
free
closely,
like
yeah.
them from the clutches of Elasan and Gul'dan and all that stuff. And so finally being able to invite them back to the Sunwell and see how that whole like thing like pans out with the Blood Elves and that interaction
Right.
like that, it just that was probably in terms of like long running stories like having a rewarding conclusion, that was the best that I've seen possibly in all of WoW, but certainly in recent memory.
Yeah, super fun. Super fun. I love that. Um, all right, let's transition away from that. Before we get into rating and stuff, I actually have a thought about legendaries, and I think that'll probably get into more rating and Titan 4G stuff else. But the legendary system as it was implemented, right, was very RNG. I mean, it was RNG. It was pretty much just like grinding as much as you can to get a random piece of gear that you wanted. Um, I just wanted to reflect on that a little bit because it is going away, and I think there are a lot of pros and cons to this system, and some things I will not miss, and some things that I actually really will miss. So,
Yeah,
so
I'm gonna
yeah,
jump ahead and
sure,
like answer your question, but I'm also going to looking at your outline that you gave me or whatever, where you're talking about
yeah, sure,
like some of the things that you liked about like the expansion as a whole or whatever. And I think
yeah.
what I really appreciate was Blizzard's willingness to take a chance, because the legendary
Chewy,
system
stop.
was very unique. It was something they hadn't tried before in this capacity. And I really appreciate them being like, you know what, we've got this idea, we're going to swing for the fences, and we're going to see what happens. I don't love the conclusion, but I really appreciate their willingness to try something new, knowing full well that it could blow up in their face and they could receive a lot of negative press like they did. My biggest
hmm
problem is not necessarily RNG,
Yeah.
because it's an MMO. RNG is fundamental to everything that we do. But like,
Yes. Emphasis on fun.
but the problem was
No.
was I feel like there was too many legendaries that did too many things. I loved how they changed your gameplay. Like
Oh
depending
yes, me
on what
too.
you equipped, like I had certain legendaries for M plus. I had different legendary build outs for almost every single boss in every single raid tier, and I loved
Yes.
that. But
Hmm.
until like I went and got every single legendary for Destruction Warlock and then every single legendary for Affliction, what I didn't like was that you couldn't pick what you were going to get. You had no control over it, and I hated the fact that it made you feel kind of spec locked. Um, it made
Yes.
it very difficult to bring up alts, and they fixed it a little bit by changing, like giving you bad luck protection and whatnot. Um,
Yeah,
but like, if you switch
but
tunes, you were
still.
at a massive disadvantage right off the bat because you didn't have legendaries. And if you're trying to switch
Yeah.
specs, like when destruction kind of started falling apart, or if I, God, thank God I didn't go like balls deep in demo because demo just was just trash. But like if you didn't start out as affliction, and then you realized how powerful affliction came later in the game, and you were trying to push like high end rating, you're pretty much boned because you were behind on
Yeah.
legendaries. You didn't have competitive stuff, and you just couldn't put out the numbers that somebody had with best in slot stuff along the way. So like again,
Yeah.
great gamble. I liked that they were willing to do it, and that it created a really fun gameplay aspect.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
having that variety and having them be so impactful to rotation and whatnot, and like some classes were better than others in terms of legendary balance. Um, but it was really weird, and especially like destruction. Our best in slot legendary for a significant portion of the expansion was actually a legendary that was locked to the demonology tier. So I found myself changing loot specs, hoping to get the right legendary. Because if I didn't get
Oh,
that one, I was
yikes.
getting legendaries for a spec that was trash, and so that
Right.
felt really bad.
Yeah.
But again, like
Yeah.
being able to implement that in the gameplay and stuff was great. Like it made like the rotation feel unique, and that coupled with tier sets and stuff, it was really fun, immersive experience. Um,
I thought so too. It was fun. It was almost like having another more than just, your 10 talents or whatever that you could choose from, or however many there are in each row. I loved that. I would totally second that. Loved how it changed my gameplay, and you'd put different ones on. I didn't even mind that some of them were worse than others, but kind of what I wrote here, and was thinking about is like the problem for me was, yes, getting a legendary and like having your heart sink because it was so hard to get one to drop. You'd have to farm it so much, kill the bosses, do whatever. I mean, there were nights, like when I was really feeling close, and you'd spend like 2 days just killing rares, killing stuff, looking for that drop,
yeah,
and then it would drop, and it'd be like, my freaking shoes
yeah,
or
yeah.
whatever, and I'd be like, that is
Yeah,
so
yeah.
bad.
Speaking, I opened
Yeah,
my bag and I just highlighted it. And I was like, yeah, that feeling of your heart sinking, like that moment when I got
yeah.
Norgonon's foresight, and I was just like,
Yes,
well,
yes.
that's
And you're like,
worthless.
oh, yeah, exactly. It's just like, dang. But it brings up, because you want to be the best. You want to be the best. And while that legendary is interesting on its own right, like, using it, properly is kind of fun and interesting. I love that it still modifies it. I just wish they weren't so, and it seems counterintuitive to say I wish they weren't so powerful and so necessary for you to be good,
Well,
but in some cases it really brings up that kind of ugly problem for me, which is like the idea of like, no, I want to be the best. I want to use these ones. I want to have the best numbers. And maybe that's a small subset of the community who feels they want it for that reason, because I want to see my parse go up or whatever, and I want to see, how good I can be. And then when I didn't have Sefu's forever, it was the last one I got, I felt like I was just nerfed. And once I got it, of course, like I shot up the meter.
well,
You know
yeah,
what
and
I
I
mean?
mean, like, I certainly like there's a certain joy when you open up Warcraft logs at the end of the raid and you look at your parse and you're like 98th percentile and you're like, hell yeah.
You're right.
But like
Yeah.
honestly, the biggest thing, like the most, at least for Warlock, and I can't really speak to the other specs because I didn't play, or the other like classes 'cause I didn't play a ton of it.
Right.
But like for Warlock, the best in slot ones actually modified your gameplay and made certain abilities like way more powerful. So like
Yeah.
having the shoulders that like paired off of the portals that are artifact open, instead of just like using that as just a filler spell while you're moving, now you're actually trying to chain them together to keep it like the most uptime as possible, because whenever one was open, then it buffed your damage, and so you're creating burst windows, and it made you look at that spell and your rotation
Yeah.
differently. And if you did it well, like that's what I love the most about it was if you use the legendary correctly, you saw a significant DPS boost,
That
because
felt
you are
good.
now getting the most out
Yeah.
of your class. Instead of it just
Yeah,
being a
exactly.
like just mash one and get the most damage or whatever, it made it feel where
Hmm.
like there was a legitimate skill cap now, where like
Yeah.
the better players were apparent,
Utilized them better.
because
Yeah,
yeah,
because
because
they
you're
could
able to
the
utilize that, and
complexity.
that's the
Yeah.
same thing. Like a lot of times where tier sets will do the same sort of thing, where like now if you're actually like hitting those burst windows right and you're doing everything like properly, you're gonna see that your numbers go up as a result, and you're gonna end up being like this beast, because you're a better player as a result. And so I love that, and I like, so that was one thing that like watching you play as Shadow Priest that was always intriguing, was especially during the era of of
Surrender.
kill yourself gameplay,
Yeah.
like if you were able to string that along and keep like a huge uptime and time that just right, where you're literally dying seconds after the boss does or right as the boss does,
Yeah.
like you saw
Yeah.
huge increases in your numbers.
Oh,
And I
absolutely.
love that, where it's not like as long as I'm pressing mashing 1 and 2 on cooldown, I'm gonna be, in the 95th
Yeah, the
percentile.
top damage. Yeah.
Like I love that. Like if you have a bad day and you're off, your numbers look like shit. But like when you have
Yeah.
that raid where everything lines up and you hit it, you just crush everyone. And if you can do that
Yeah.
consistently, you're like hell yeah. Like this time that I put into this game, it feels rewarding, because you can see it
Yeah.
on the meters, you can see it on the logs, you can see it in the pars,
Yeah.
and the rotation just feels so
Yeah.
good. So the
Yeah.
legendaries, I think more so even than the set bonuses, I think did a really
Hmm.
great job in some cases of bringing that out. The problem was, again, if you needed that specific legendary and you didn't get it until your sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth legendary, you were just
Yeah.
shit
Felt
for
bad.
two,
Felt
three
bad.
tiers. Like yeah,
Yeah.
you were just
Yeah.
boned. Like because
Yeah.
there's only so much you could do, and they eventually implemented that. Hey,
Yeah.
you can spend your shards. They kept,
Eventually, but still, that was a long
well,
time. I
and they
mean,
kept saying, well, you can target it with these shard vendors. Do you know? Like, I never heard of a case where
I
someone
never got one
bought
off a
bought
shard.
like they're like, I need shoulders, and so they buy the
I think
shoulder
only
and they open
once.
up and they get a legendary. I literally
Yeah.
cannot think of
Yeah.
a single case where someone was able to
I know
target and get the
someone did
legendary.
it. Yeah. I don't remember who it was. It was either Dawes or
Yeah,
Sinclair or
yeah,
somebody had called it and they grabbed it, but like that never
because
happened
that
to me, and I did a
yeah,
lot of farming,
that
a
that
lot.
needed to be either a higher percentage drop or like a separate set of
Right.
RNG or something like that. Because if
Right.
you're gonna say you can
But
target
even
them,
then, there's like you want the ring. There's still like four rings on that table or
well, yeah,
something,
yeah,
you
it
know.
was so shitty because now like I start getting close to the shards and stuff, and I hadn't had a legendary for a while, so I'm like, well, now I can't raid or do world quests on this tune because I'm hoping to get what I want from this quote unquote target. And there was nothing worse than you
Right.
finally got the shards, you spend it, you don't get it, and then the next world quest, like you do the emissary, and then you get
Yeah.
Cephas or something like that, which ended up actually being awesome for Mythic Plus, but at the time was like initially was like, oh fuck me,
Right.
Cephas doesn't do
Well,
anything for me.
right, and then it was way, way better. But kind of a funny aside on that related stories, there were the two times that I felt bad about that. The one was we killed that Croesus. You remember this. It was insane. And then this legendary dropped, and we were all looking at it, and I realized I was
The
in
disc.
discipline.
Yeah.
Yeah, that hurt really bad. That hurt.
The best part
I
was
was
that
pretty
was
sad.
like the day after Ledora did the opposite and got a Shadow Legendary on
I
accident. And
know.
I was like, you
Ah,
didn't learn from her mistake. Like,
it was so bad. Then the other time was exactly as you said. I was like, okay, I almost have enough nether shards to go roll on the ring, to go get this ring. And I killed a rare on the broken shore, and it dropped that legendary that I didn't
yeah,
want. And I was like, oh, I was so close. Maybe it would have been when I bought this
yeah.
ring. But,
There's ways they could have fixed that and made
yeah,
it work better,
yeah,
but that system's
yeah,
dead. So like, I like again, I'm glad they took a chance. I think it had interesting ties, but ultimately we can debate it until
yeah.
like we're blue in the
Yeah,
face.
seriously,
But
though.
unless they
Yeah.
announce that they're going to bring that in mid expansion, that system's gone, and you know,
Yeah, then
it's
it's something that we can remember
yeah.
fondly or with frustration. The last question I have in regards to legendaries, do you have a favorite legendary? that changed your gameplay enough, or that you just love that you go to
Well, I mean,
for your
it's kind
spec?
of weird because ultimately, at the end, probably my favorite ended up being Prides, but that was
It's such a well-rounded
well,
little
and like
Lego,
I
isn't
mean,
it?
you were using it for progression, and I wasn't because I was like,
I
I've
was. It was the only one I
well,
had for a
yeah,
while.
I was like, I don't care. Like the healers are gonna keep me up, and if they don't, I'm gonna like just like talk shit. But I ended up loving it because like at first I wasn't a huge Mythic Plus fan. Like I love the
Hmm.
idea, but
Hmm.
pushing high keys felt like frustrating. But then as they kind of adjusted the affixes and stuff, that has been probably my favorite thing to come from Legion is the Mythic Plus system,
Absolutely.
and
This is a good
and
transition to M
and
plus.
Prides I think for better or for worse, enabled a lot of things that you couldn't get away with. So like Grievous Week, you throw Prides on, now
Hmm.
you're taking less damage because you're constantly like putting the shield back up, and that
Right.
allows you to survive. As where before you would rely on healers that couldn't necessarily keep up in some cases, especially if they're disciplined. They just
Yeah.
didn't have
Yeah.
the out of
Depending on the
combat
healer
healing. Yeah,
class.
like Prides became essential to push high keys. So like I didn't love Prides, and I don't necessarily love the fact that it was required, but I loved what it allowed me to do in game. It allowed me to experience content that I necessarily wouldn't have been able to do, and got a ton
Yeah.
of enjoyment out of Mythic Plus. But in terms of like its actual like impact on gameplay, again, Lessons of Space Time, the Warlock Destruction Shoulders, which just completely changed the way that you use rifts. I thought was a huge game changer in the whole rotation and stuff, and I saw a significant increase. My damage always was pretty much the entire expansion simmed as like the number one legendary, and it was fun from a gameplay perspective. So I had those on pretty
Yeah.
much all the way up until pre-patch when my dimensional rifts went away because my artifact died, and so they're like, hey, that legendary just gives you like a 3% damage buff, and it's no longer
Yeah.
best in slot. But I enjoyed
Right.
that.
So Pride Ass for me was like, well, the first one I got, and I was so bummed about it all, but I learned to love it so much because it actually ended up being a slight DPS increase for me because there were certain like raid mechanics where like, you need to back away from fallen avatar or you're going to take a lot of damage. But I didn't really have to go at all because it would just eat my shield and nothing else. And so I could just keep standing there and running my rotation rather than having to kind of waste some of that. So it was a little bit, I loved it. But my favorite one, I think, I mean, Sephu's was great, of course, but the one I loved most of all was Twins. I loved the Twins. Painful touch, and that just spread the dots for you because it was a fundamental change to your rotation. Like Mistress, it was worth it to wait to enter. Well, not to wait to enter Void Form, but it's worth it to wait to Mind Flay in your rotation until the ads would pop up because then you could spread them instantly and have all those dots out there immediately. And I thought that was a really cool kind of adjustment to the class that caused you to think on your feet, to watch the timers, to kind of see where you're at. I really, really, really loved that legendary, and unfortunately, it didn't see a lot of play in Antorus. A little bit, you could have, but it was just better to stay on the other legendaries. It was just kind of numbers
Yeah.
wise.
Well, that was one of the cool
So
things too. Was with so many different types of fights, certain
yeah,
legendaries that weren't good eventually kind of saw like their
yes,
things throughout. So that was fun too.
I
Where
liked
as
that.
the mechanics change, all of a sudden like you're like, ooh, I've got this combination of affixes this week, so I'm going to change my legendaries. Or hey, we're
Yeah,
going into two target cleave or mass AOE or single target or a council style fight, and so you different talent sets coupled with tier sets coupled with legendaries, you could feel almost like you were playing a different spec
right.
in some
That was
regards, which
cool.
was
It
nice.
felt really good, didn't
Yeah,
it?
and that
I
that
loved
was
that.
like in terms of them being like, hey, play your game. Like they did a really good job on that.
Yeah, not every legendary was perfect, but there were some who did that. But you brought up Mythic Plus. I don't think we need to spend much time in it because I think both you and I are going to have similar
Yeah, it's
feelings
great.
that are pretty basic, which is it's
Yeah,
awesome,
it's
right?
great.
Wasn't that great?
We're seeing some new changes. I'm curious to see how it pans out. Watching like
Me
Sloot
too.
and Automatic Jack and a lot of those guys on beta, like streaming their stuff. They seem like the new system is great. I think we're getting new affixes that they haven't tested a lot eventually, and
I'm
we've got the
interested.
new
Yeah,
seasonal affix, which is certainly going to be interesting. The change. What
that
are your
will be.
thoughts on the change to where Tyrannical or Fortified is at a +2 right off the bat? Every Mythic Plus is going to be Tyrannical or Fortified.
I think I don't- like honestly, I'm having a hard time kind of imagining that, only because it's been so long, this expansion, that it's been like, oh, it's under 10, don't have to worry about that. You know what I mean? Because that is pretty game that has a big effect. Like when we're talking about doing a maw over 10, like that just sounds terrible on Tyrannical because of that second boss and how long some of those, and Helya as well, as you mentioned off stream yesterday or whatever. But like, so I'm having a hard time imagining that. Like, does it scale? Like, does that affect
Well,
scale
it
with
honestly, like,
each?
I was thinking about it, and I kind of had your same thoughts initially, but like the more
Yeah.
I've like played around with the thought in my brain and stuff, I like lately I don't know the last time I did a keystone below 10.
Oh,
So
I know
so
the truth. Well,
I
now only on
well,
my
and so
alts.
honestly,
Yeah.
like, well, I mean, once I kind of got to the point where I was doing tens and then 15s and stuff, and then when they do their squish back down to tens, basically once I had the gear to do better than a 10,
Hmm.
I never did anything less than a 10. So I honestly,
Because why
well,
would you?
I
Yeah.
honestly don't think it's like, I think it's interesting, but I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. Like, it's going to be hard potentially at first, like for
I
that
don't
initial
mind that
gearing
though.
point, but
Thinking
like
about that.
but again, like, it's like this time round they built the dungeons with that in mind. So I don't think it's going to be as
Yeah.
big of a deal, because going in that these Mythic Pluses, they built these dungeons with Mythic Plus in mind, and with the success of the MDI, they're going all in on Mythic Pluses with Mythic Plus seasons and stuff. Like, that's one of the things I'm the
I'm
most hyped
excited
for,
about that.
is M Plus
Yeah.
in BFA. But like I don't
Yeah.
think it's going to be as big of a deal as people are making it out to be, because it's
Sure.
fundamental to the new experience. And it's just something you're going to have to contend with. And yeah, maybe certain keys are going to be better or worse any given week, but that's no different than now. Like, and
Hmm.
that's really where, like, you
Hmm.
kind of test your metal, where all of a sudden, yeah, you've got that tyrannical 15 maw. Is it doable? Certainly, but it's going to be harder, and
Yes.
it requires you to be a little more on
Better
point.
execution,
As where,
honestly.
like, if you're
Yeah.
just looking for an easy experience to get that chest, maybe you're going to go somewhere like Court of Stars or whatever, where tyrannical isn't
Where the
as
bosses, yeah,
awful.
it's not a big deal.
Um,
But that's what's kind of fun is because can't you target now, kind of where you want your key to go,
I don't
or did I miss
believe
that?
there was some stuff on beta where you could like do your own stuff, but from that, I think that was an early idea. I don't think
Didn't
I think
work
the
out.
keys are still
Okay.
the same, where you get a key, and
Yeah,
it just
and
it
it is
has
what
what
it
it
is.
has. They're like,
Okay.
that was a lot of that was on the MDI realm, where you could go in and you could build your own key, because those teams were practicing their own stuff. And I
Specific
think that was,
dungeons. That
yeah,
makes sense.
mentioned as an idea for the game, but I think that was just something that was kicked around and then
They
didn't end up
walked
being
away from it.
practical, because then everybody's just going
Yeah.
to choose whatever the easiest combo is, and there's no challenge. So
Right. That makes sense. No, honestly, I think having those affixes right at the beginning, the more I'm thinking about it, I think it's fine. I think Mythic, even a +2, should be harder than a Mythic,
well,
dungeon,
especially
as
when
far as I'm
you're
concerned.
getting a chest at the end of the week that's going to Titan Forge, essentially. So you're gonna get a good piece of gear equivalent.
Right.
Like, you need to earn that reward, and especially now with
Right.
the chest being the only way from Mythic Pluses that you can actually get a piece of Azurite gear. They're gonna make you earn that gear, and I think that's good, because right now, where you could just farm endlessly M pluses and eventually
Right.
get your Titan Forges and stuff, and people could basically be Mythic raid geared, like walking into Mythics. That's
You gotta
not
earn
going to
that
be the
stuff.
case so much anymore, and like the
Right.
gearing is been somewhat stifled, I guess, going into BFA. I think with the intent to kill split rating, but also to make it feel like less of a burden on the
On just
the casual plus
the
players. Yeah, somebody
mid-casual.
that's trying
Yeah,
to
that's it.
yeah, more than casual, but not like doing 7 split raids.
Right.
Like, if
Who wish they could actually reach some
yeah,
level of
your
of.
time commitment will go further now than it did before, in terms of like a
I'll be
smaller
interested.
commitment. So I'm curious to see how
Yeah.
it pans out, because you listen to like dudes from Method and stuff, and a lot of people are upset about it. But I don't know. I think for 99% of the player base,
Yeah.
you're either not going to notice the change, or it's going to feel better in the long run.
Yeah. I'll be interested. Interested to see. So Myth Plus is good. Let's move on from that. That's good. Let's get into the thing we probably do most of, which is obviously raiding. We're in our guild that is pretty much only together to raid, and we've had some pretty good experiences with that a little bit with a few different guild groups and whatnot. But this is for me, so this will be interesting to hear from you, because I've been like an LFR hero since WAD. I have never stepped into a live raid at normal difficulty or above, anything higher than LFR, until Emerald Nightmare. Before I even met you, I was tickling Emerald Nightmare with my Paladin, with my Holy Pally. So, so you have a much longer and storied past in raiding at different levels. But so coming from that and having my first experience actually raiding with a guild in a social environment, I've really enjoyed it from that perspective. And I thought it was kind of cool to have 5 different raids, especially after the kind of tragedy of warlords losing pretty much Shatrath raid, and there might have been one more. I mean, pretty much it was like they should have made a raid out of the garrison or something. If you're going to put it all in there, you should have just been able to go raid the other person's garrison, make it a PvE thing. I don't know. Anyway, nevertheless, that's another topic. But oh man, I just cast 2 spells on myself, and I wanted to be fishing. Okay, so I liked the variety in the raids from the get-go. I thought it was a nice build-up, though I have my favorites and whatnot. What are your general thoughts on raiding
Yeah, I mean,
here?
raiding was like I've always, like I said, I've done every raid tier I think in WoW. Um,
Yeah,
kind of. Vanilla, I didn't push all the way. Like I wasn't a Nax raider or whatever, but I've been around for all the raiding, and I've seen it every
right,
expansion. That's more fair to say. I've
right,
never been the tippy
right.
top, but I enjoyed it. I like the diversity of the raids. Like aesthetically, there was big changes. So you had EN, which is all like
Huge.
black and red and like
Yeah.
corruption and stuff, and then
Hmm.
you go into Nighthold, which is this beautiful, pretty
Oh,
Elven
yes.
City, and then from there or I guess in between that we had Trial of Valor, which was like all the
Yep.
Odin stuff, and then you had like Helya and all
Hmm.
that, and but then at the end, I guess we
Yeah,
Tomb and Taurus were
and
a little redundant,
Taurus.
I guess, because it was demons and fell or whatever in terms of the
Right.
aesthetics. But it was a nice variety
We'll
in
say.
like color lore wise. Like Nighthold was the best, I think, lore wise, in terms of its
Oof.
delivery.
Yes.
En, I think, was brilliant, but I wish it had been expanded upon, because it was like this really great idea, all these like foreshadowing for what we assume might happen in BFA with N'Zoth, maybe
Old
maybe not.
gods.
But
Yeah.
then like we just kind of were like, up, we cleansed it, whatever, and we just kind of moved on and like never looked back. Um,
Hmm.
Tomb and Throne obviously had huge lore implications, in terms of like what was happening
Hmm.
in the world. But
Yeah, that was the great. Finally, we're taking on the Burning
I mean,
Crusade
there were
head
some
on.
big bosses this expansion.
Huge
You're killing
bosses. I've got
Gul'dan.
my eyes on Kill
Gul'dan
Jaden,
early on, we finally
Gul'dan.
fight Kil'jaeden in the flesh instead of like sticking out of a portal and kill him.
Yeah, he's got
Kill,
legs. He's
kill
got
him for good.
legs.
It seems like, and then yeah, then like I mean, the
Yeah,
avatar
well,
of Sargeras,
Velen
and
cast
then through Argus banish Sargeras or whatever. So like the big bad, that like the Burning Legion is done, more or less. Like
done essentially. Well,
which
he's on
which
ice.
yeah. Him and Illidan are around until sub numbers break, and then we need to bring them out to
We
fight
need to
Void Lords.
hollow. Yeah,
Um,
we'll see about that.
but yeah, no, like I mean,
Ay,
it was
ay,
it
ay.
was a lot of stuff going on,
It's
which is
huge,
gonna be
huge world
which is
implications.
crazy, because it's like, okay, so we're going into BFA. Like, is that the new standard? Because how do you build the hype that much every expansion? Like,
I
like
know.
Uldir, I
It,
mean, is
it
kind of
worries
like
me.
a minion of like old gods and Loas or whatever. Like, it's kind of its thing. I don't really know the lore on it, but it's
It's kind of. It feels like mid-level.
yeah. I mean,
We've had Ulduar, we've had AQ. It's kind of somewhere in
yeah, I
between
mean,
all that.
it's
You
a
know what I
Titan
mean?
factory or something, so it harkens to lore that makes
Right.
sense or whatever. And then I think they've said that Ashara is the second big like raid.
I think that's that. I don't think it's officially confirmed. I think it's really strongly.
But that's going to be interesting, because
Uh,
she's been alluded to, and then she's just going to come out and die. Like, that seems, I don't know, a little
yeah.
anticlimactic, but we'll see how. Like, it's hard to
Right.
judge early, so maybe we'll fight her, but she doesn't die, or there's gonna be
Right.
more build up than we anticipated. But we'll see how that pans out. But
Right.
then where do you go from there? I mean, like, we could fight another old god, which is an obvious option, but that's like
Right.
3 options. So unless we're like seeing void lords or some big threat emerges that hasn't been presented,
That's
or if we have some sort of
yeah.
weird, because like faction wars, they're parroting the orcs and humans like cover. We're talking about like horde versus alliance. We're creating this big narrative, but the raids don't reflect that at all. So I don't know. Are we gonna Garrosh
That's
again?
what
Are we
I'm
gonna
wondering
fight
about.
Sylvanas? That seems cheap and shitty. but it's something you could do, or is there going to be something
Right.
interesting amongst that? Is there going to
Right.
be like, is Kalia Menethil going to like turn into like a demon and like we're going to have to kill her? I don't know.
We're gonna get to kill
Like
her.
there's all kinds of interesting. I mean, and demons aren't gone. Like the Burning Legion
Yeah.
is disrupted, but that doesn't mean that there's no more demons in the world. So there's options, but I'm
No.
curious. There's not a lot of tell, which is good and bad. It means they
Right.
could be holding it close to the chest, and there could be just these amazing stories that are coming forward. Or if it goes the way that they're kind of setting it up, it creates unease in me because I'm
Yeah. I'm
where are we
I'm really
gonna
wondering
go?
about
Like
that.
if we fight Sylvanas, dude, I am gonna be so mad.
And as always, we could speculate forever about like lore wise, but I think you bring up a good point that the raids, in this expansion, I think all at least did a good job of kind of leading one into the next, you know, pulling like, Val Shara led straight into Emerald Nightmare. We had, Trial of Valor kind of coming out of the storytelling going on in Stormheim and whatnot, but it's all kind of related, especially
Night
once we
Hold
get into
On was
yeah, Night Hold On
one
was
very
just one
linear
big long
storyline, yeah.
raid, right? Yeah. So I'm wondering about that.
Which is kind of unique, I guess, when you look back, because you look at Vanilla or whatever, and like there was really, I mean, it was great storytelling, but there wasn't a theme per se. And then in previous expansions, like you saw Illidan on the cover of Burning Crusade, you saw Arthas on the cover of the ICC, whatever the hell that expansion was called. Um, so you knew who the big bad was going in, but in this case, we don't really know, which is
Oh
very
man.
interesting because like they had alluded, I think, at BlizzCon in Legion that hey, we're gonna see Argus, and so you kind of knew the direction. BFA, we're going in
Right.
blind, man. Like
We're going in and I'm
which
kind of
yeah, I'm
excited
excited
about
because if
that.
like
Yeah.
Blizzard, I mean like as pissed off as people are about the Taldrassil thing, myself included, they have never completely failed story wise throughout an entire expansion. So I think
No,
they've got
no.
something up their sleeves. I'm cautiously optimistic, hoping that they're going to blow us out of the water. Um,
I think cautiously optimistic. That's
but I'm
good.
but I'm also
Yes.
I'm also nervous, like because
Yeah.
they've bought back a lot of their street cred with this expansion. They fixed a lot of the negatives of the last three. And I
Yeah.
really don't want them to squander our good faith and deliver something shitty.
I know. Just send everybody away.
But all we can do
Let's
is play and
see.
see. And you know,
That's all.
we'll,
I know that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, let's
you'll
see.
see. We'll be fishing on some foreign planet somewhere in the future
Yeah,
when we've gone
exactly.
into space, and
Because
we'll have this conversation 3 years from now when we're going into like midway through whatever the next expansion is.
right, right. So, kind of back into those raids. Do you have a favorite encounter across those 5 raids, or a couple,
Uh,
couple
I,
that you
I
really
think
enjoyed?
Nighthold as a raid was my favorite raid.
I think me too.
Aesthetically, it was
I think.
great. The fights were fun. What I loved about Nighthold was some of the fights were incredibly difficult going into them, but once you mastered them, they never felt trolly afterwards. Like once you
Oh
had the gear,
yes.
once you had like the understanding, it felt like okay, we've outgeared this. As where like Kill
Yeah.
Jaden, even today, you can go in and wipe because it's so I guess it's weird to say, but it's so demanding mechanically of each individual player that if you don't have a
Right.
great group, you're destined to fail. And then like Coven was
Right.
pure RNG. So like while I loved Tuma
Oh,
Sargeras and I loved
jeez.
Antorus, there were parts of it that felt so bad that it like really tainted the whole thing. But I can't
It
like when I
absolutely
look at
did.
Nighthold, yeah, there were some fights that were better than others. Chronomatic Anomaly wasn't the most compelling fight, but
Yeah.
it was fun. Like there was stuff to do.
Just so fun
Like
enough.
like
This fast and slow. It felt good to go so fast
Scorpatron was
sometimes.
like an easy first fight, but
Easy
like,
boss
but I
one.
mean that's a
Loved it.
first fight, and you go in and you do it.
Yeah.
Gul'dan was hard, but once you figured it out, super easy to go and clear in the
We did
future.
him well. We were farming him well. I think that was our best
Yeah,
farm. I mean, by the time we got into there, because we had the strategy. It was easy as a raid lead to like even pug that because we had the strategy and the communication, and people could do it. You know
and
what I
when you
mean?
talk
Like,
favorite encounter, I think Elasan was probably one of if not
ooh,
my favorite encounter because when you were low geared, when you didn't know what you were doing, multiple rounds of rings that were lethal. You've got the falling orbs and stuff that were hard to deal with. You had all the blasts. There was a lot of mechanics. It was a DPS check within stuff. Very dynamic fight, but then you felt that progression as you got better. The mechanics, you kind of didn't even notice them anymore because you're doing your own thing. And then
Right.
now you can go in like with really good gear and you'll never see any of the rings because you can just out damage it. So I always loved that where
Yeah,
you could feel throughout the course of the expansion, you can go back to a fight and you can be like, yeah, man, I can crush this shit because I'm so much
exactly.
better of a player. Same thing I think
Because
you
you're
could say of Botanist. Botanist was
yes. Oh, I love botanist.
brutal for people. Well, that was probably the hardest
Yeah.
fight in that raid.
Oh
But
yeah,
like as you got
definitely.
better and as people figured it out, it just became like you were
Yeah.
able to just like push through it and you could carry on that fight. And then
Yes.
Gul'dan's the same way.
Yeah.
Like those three fights, and then I mean I love that whole raid. Like you could Spellblade was so hard
So it was so great, but
until you
again,
figured
like
out
I
once you
think
knew where to put the markers and you're
yeah,
like, here's the strat. Then it was like, okay, we figured it out. We have our strat, and now you
right.
can just plow
And
through it. Like that was it
right.
felt good. That whole raid
It
felt
felt
good
to me
because you
like
could feel the
it
progression.
right, and it felt to me like it was really covering what I and I think most people really enjoy about rating, which is like a team, coming together, communicating enough to like put this strategy into play and have it work,
Yeah,
So once we figured out like that progression was so fun, like when we figured out, how to make those calls on botanist, which I think has got to be one of my favorite fights from this expansion. It was great because I had twins at the time and I was like top deeps. It was just a good feeling. But like once we figured that out, how to do the dispels and stuff, it felt good to
yeah,
execute. Same with Spellblade. And I remember there was that one night we were raiding, and I noticed we were with another guild. We were just with Tag, right? We were just hanging out, and I noticed as we were doing it, I was like, wait, there is a pattern to these things, and you figure that out, and you learn it, and then you execute, and it did feel really good for
yeah.
that. Tomb also had some of that going on. Kill Jaden was hard, but like,
Honestly, like
uh,
Tomb all the way up until Guild Jaden felt pretty good. Like,
yeah,
what was it?
colorblind
Yeah,
test or
yeah,
which
yeah.
one?
Maiden of Vigilance was a little iffy because one person could ruin everything, but if everybody was together, it was pretty good. I think Fallen Avatar was a great fight because it was
That was
extremely
a
difficult.
fun
It
fight.
had pretty hard
It was a tank
DPS.
test too. I love that it made the tanks work
It
hard.
had hard DPS checks, but it wasn't. It didn't feel trolly because like you had an established
Mm-mm.
rhythm to everything. As where Kill
Mm-hmm.
Jaden felt so punishing for any little mistake, which isn't necessarily bad, but that fight never felt good because one
No.
person messes up and doesn't soak the Armageddon, you're done.
Yeah.
One person gets
Yeah.
punted off because they weren't paying attention to the orb or whatever, you're done.
Right.
And you push into phase three, and even then, nothing was a gimme because you got to kite that dumb orb around. And if the wrong
Yes.
person dies because they have to double soak Armageddons, you're done.
Right.
If you get
Right.
bad spawns on those stupid pillars, you're done. Like everything about that, it was so hard to
There
predict.
were too many things in there that was like you're done if you screw
Yeah.
this
And
thing up. Yeah.
the same
So,
thing that was my complaint I think with Agrimar as well was because the
mhm.
CCs on Heroic are so dependent. You had to put so much faith in people. One person messes up and you get a double stack unless you're prepared for it. You're dead.
Yeah,
Um,
Agrimar was tough. I
Coven was
thought
its
art
own thing. The RNG of Coven drove me crazy. If there was a pattern to
right.
Coven, I think it would have been a brilliant fight. But the fact that everything was random made it
Hmm.
unpredictable and made it trolly and made it unfun.
It was kind of rough. I'm sure there was min maxing we could have done, but like still, it just. But when you have to do that, like at our level, like I think we're accomplished players. We could mythic if we want to. I love that. Yeah, I'd mythic if I
Yeah,
wanted
easy
to,
to
but
say,
you know what I
harder to
mean.
do.
Like
But
exactly. But at the same time, where it's like at the level we're playing at, I don't think that kind of min maxing on Coven should have been necessary. Like that, like intensity of like things we could have done to mitigate every single
yeah,
possibility that was coming at us was really rough. Also, it just was morally, like morale. It was just like,
it was morally gray.
it was so morally. That was the most morally great thing.
Yeah, no, yeah,
The only
yeah.
thing I'll say about Antorus though is I thought Argus could have been this much harder. Just a little pinch, just a pinch,
Argus, I
just a little
like
tougher.
Argus honestly because you can still go into
Yeah.
heroic Argus fights and wipe. Like it's still a thing that people can fuck up.
Uh,
Um,
yeah, I guess you're right.
like
Mostly bomb and
I
then
think
orbs.
Argus was just the right amount of difficulty for heroic,
Hmm.
because it's not mythic rating. It's not meant to be impossible. It's not Kill Jaden.
Aha.
And I think it's tuned just right for where it needs to be. Yeah, it could be a little bit harder, but I don't think it's necessary for it to feel like fulfilling. Um,
Yeah, yeah, right. Very interesting then. Um, Overall though, I enjoyed my first like real guild rating experience here. Trial of Valor is the one that kind of falls to the bottom for me, just because I think it came at a time. It wasn't really
Uh,
the fights. I liked Dog. What was that dog's name?
oh God.
Starts with a G. I don't remember.
Whatever.
See, I can't even remember. That Helya fight actually.
Guarm.
Let me take
Guarm.
that back. Yeah, Guarm. That's it. Guarm was all right, but the Helya fight I thought was a fun mechanically, kind of different with the phases and
Yeah,
stuff.
that
But
I actually, when you talk about the tuning and difficulty and stuff, I feel like that was probably one of the more challenging raids because it came out,
Helya.
well, just the whole Trial of Valor. That
Oh
it
yeah, the
came out
whole
at an
thing.
interesting time,
Hmm.
kind of caught people off guard, and a lot of people had hard times AOTCing. Like that was not. I don't
They
think
did.
we ever did it as a guild.
We didn't do it as the guild.
Because
No,
we
we
were
all
we
just did
were
it
planning a
separately.
break at that point in time, and so like it kind of hit at a
Right.
weird time. But like difficulty
Yeah.
wise, that was one of the hardest raids I think there was to get through. Like
Odin was kind of
Odin
tough.
wrecked people,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, he was
Helya
tough.
required a lot of cooperation. I think that was an incredibly well tuned raid. Like I think the difficulty of it was good. I think it just caught people off guard because
Across it.
nobody was
Yeah.
expecting it. It just kind of came out, and people were like, "Oh
Yes.
shit!" Like, wait, what? We were getting ready
It came at the same
for
time as
Nighthold.
like Karazhan 2.
Yeah,
There was a lot of stuff going on at the
yeah.
time, and so it wasn't like a priority with little there were no tier or nothing in there, so it's just kind of like, whoa, here we go. But overall, I thought it was fun to go back so much into that
Well,
area,
like the
fight
one thing I
Odin.
love about that was the willingness of Blizzard to just put together a little 3 boss raid like that. Instead of having to do a giant tier with 11 bosses, being willing to throw a 3 boss raid together like that. Like I kind of miss the days of Anexia
Like the two boss
or
raid
yeah,
and a one boss
Gruul's
raid.
Lair or
Me too.
Magdaradin's Lair, where you get like these little one-offs. It's got some lore implications. It's a chance to get some extra gear, but
Yeah,
it's a quick, easy thing where hey, we cleared
absolutely.
our run of Nighthold quickly tonight. We've got some extra
Yep.
time. Does anybody want
Hmm.
to go and kill whatever real quick?
Yeah.
Throw a mount on
In
there,
fact,
throw some cool transmog, have a chance for whatever. Like those little kind of
yeah,
one-offs to fill the gaps, fill your talk are great, and I
absolutely.
really appreciate
I
them.
would have loved those, even more than like, there was a million world bosses and stuff. I would have taken half the world bosses if we got like one or even two. There was talk. Remember those rumors where it was like, I think there's maybe one more like one boss or two boss raid at the end of this thing. I would have loved that. Wouldn't that have been super
I've
fun?
always wondered, like
I would have loved that.
having a 1 boss or a 2 boss as part of the pre-launch experience,
That would have been
during
fun. Well, we'd get our guild back together to
yeah. Well,
raid. You
all of
know
a
what I
sudden
mean?
you
You could
do
do that.
the stat squishes, and oh by the way, we're not just doing this quest chain. Surprise! Here's a pseudo challenging world boss, or here's an actual raid. Like it might freak people out because if like guilds are full on break and then there's like this new encounter and they're like, what the fuck? But
Yeah,
like
it'd have to be not too
how great would
difficult,
it
but
be where all of a sudden they're just like, hey, here's like a scenario,
here's a little
and
fight.
yeah, here's one boss,
Yeah.
pretty easy to get through, only one difficulty, not like LFR, normal, heroic, and mythic or something. You just throw together
Yeah.
basically, I guess, a world boss, but you could instance it instead of having it as a world boss or something like that.
That'd
That'd
be
be kind of
nice.
cool.
Instancing it. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on world bosses?
Hopefully.
That's something I hadn't
Future.
thought about talking about, but like world bosses,
World bosses are loot
yeah, 'cause
pinatas.
they
They are
weren't a thing
not
for a long
anything.
time. They were, and then they weren't, and
Mm-mm.
now they're like a staple. And yeah, it's like you do it for your chance at loot,
No.
and I kind of
That's
like
it.
it, like because it's something you can do. You don't have to be in the guild to do. They're pretty easy.
I like getting the loot.
But
Yeah.
I
I like
kind of
getting
hate
the
it
loot.
because like if you get loot, usually when they launch, at least at the beginning, like it's before the raid even drops, so you're getting raid
Right.
quality gear before the raid. So if you get loot, it
Right.
feels great because now you got that edge walking into the raid. But if you don't,
Right.
then you're like,
Right.
fuck, I'm at a disadvantage. And so like
Exactly.
I kind of like
I remember as like a baby player though, I'd walk by a world boss and be like, "Man, I wish I could fight that." You
yeah.
know what I mean? Like, cause I'm like just one guy with like no
Yeah,
guild or
I
whatever.
wish there were
But
less of them. I wish they weren't necessarily on a weekly rotation, and I wish they were less
yeah,
impactful, but still somehow like either they drop a shit ton of Azerite, or they've got some
yeah,
cool cosmetics, or they have a chance at a
yeah.
mountain or something. So there's a reason to do them, and it feels cool to go and kill them, but it doesn't
Y-
affect your ability to go and be successful in the raid tier.
The one that I liked in Draenor, who was that stupid demon? That Doc soloed with six other
Oh,
people.
yeah, Doom Lord Kazakh.
Doomlord
He
Kazakh.
he's been in
I
the
kind of
game
like
3
that one.
times, so that was his third appearance,
Yeah,
and he's a recurring
he
world boss,
he's
which is kind of cool.
impressive. Yeah, but I like, like Fell Reaver to me is interesting. Fell Reaver was interesting because it doesn't drop anything. You just like it just killed you. I thought that was
Well,
kind of
yeah, I
fun.
love that. Those roaming just like murder bots that just yeah.
Yeah, you're just like get out of the way, it'll
It's
kill
like
you.
the whale sharks or whatever, where you can kill them just to say you
Yeah,
did it, but it doesn't actually do anything.
right, exactly.
But it feels
Yeah,
like it's part of the
so
world. Yeah, those are
I
neat.
think we could do less world bossing because like to me I have no reason to want to do it because they're not hard to
Well, it
do,
feels like a chore
especially
when
with
they
like a
add
group
one every
finder.
single time, and now, especially with legendaries, I had to
Yeah.
do every world boss every week for a chance to
Well, and the
legendary.
achievement, I needed an achievement for it, I
Yeah,
think, for
it's
some
one of those things
reason.
where I think world bosses less is more. Don't
Yeah.
necessarily have one for every raid tier. Don't scale the stuff so it's crazy. Have one that's impactful for a reason that shows up once or twice in an expansion, and it's not up every week. It's once every 3 weeks it pops up, and everybody's like, "Oh fuck!" Like you don't know when it's going to be, and all of a sudden you log in for this week, and so's up, and you have a chance to go kill it or something like that. Like it feels
Right.
more impactful when it's scarce, but when it becomes like the norm, then it just becomes a chore, and it feels less fun. I think at that point.
Right. Absolutely. So that's where I'm at with those. Um, all in all, there's like so many other things we could talk about with Legion and
Yeah.
whatnot. Because there's just so many things. One last little, kind of highlight for me before we kind of do our in summation, maybe the best thing on a personal level. You know what I thought was really cool, I like storytelling and I like being involved. I like that you are, a hero in the midst of this grand narrative. I really liked the class hall stuff. I really liked that storytelling. It was fun to feel like your classes at least had a very specific thing going on, and it was cool because like I think you played them all the stories,
Yes.
get that lore. I did not, and so there are big holes I don't know about, and I'm just hearing rumors of what Bolvar's up to, or like creepy
Dude,
stuff Rogues went and did, or like
the priest, the paladin, and the death knight
those
ones
were
were
cool
so
ones,
cool because
so
they
good,
felt like the death
relevant, so
the
relevant.
Death Knight one. You're trying to steal Tyrion's body to turn him into one of your four horsemen. Like
Oh
how cool is that?
man,
Like you don't succeed, but like that's like
right.
nuts. Like that was like that's like
Would have been cool if that
the
was the
most Death
other
Knight
half
thing
of
you
a
can try.
paladin quest.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and like the paladins, the fact that the paladins and the priests their quest chains
Yeah,
overlap.
they team
Yeah,
up and they
because
stuff.
you're
That's so
both
cool.
agents of the light, and so you're trying to vanquish and do
Yes.
this thing. Like that was cool. The warlock one, like getting the destruction weapon, felt really cool
Oh, that was
because
cool.
you're
I love
stealing
that.
a weapon from
I did that.
Gul'dan that was formed by Sargeras as like his scepter, and so
Hmm.
like with this is before the Burning Legion had like shown up on the Broken Shore, but like it was like
Yeah.
Gul'dan was doing his stuff and he's working, and so like lore wise you're like, oh shit, what's he up to? And you see him for a chance, and you're stealing one of the big weapons he was planning on using. Like
Yeah.
it felt
Yeah.
impactful without actually having any impact on the story, but it felt
Yes.
so like perfect. But then there were other ones that were like major disappointments where it's
Yeah, total
like
farts.
like
I heard rogues
Affliction.
like generally were kind of like
Yeah, the Rogue one was so weird because they went with the pirate theme, and the hey, we're like criminals in the underbelly instead of like the Ravenhold thing, which just wasn't the Rogue vibe that I was looking forward to. So it felt a little weird.
yeah.
Like,
Some people probably liked
yeah, I
it,
guess it
but
depends on what your view of what a rogue is.
right. They should have had two rogue storylines. You could pick the pirate one or like
Well,
the
it was
the
cool,
other
like,
one.
cause you like the rogue thing that I liked was there were impactful people that were like rogues, like you had Garona, like showed up, who was a known
Yeah,
assassin. So like the people you worked with were really cool,
we're cool.
but the storyline itself was kind of lackluster. Like the
Hmm.
Affliction one, you just went and found like a fucking weapon in the basement of Karazhan. I was like, this is kind of
Yeah,
lame, and it was like the same one
that
for
was
like
kind of
three
lame.
different specs. So it was like
For three of them, it
it didn't
was.
feel unique, and that
Yeah.
felt kind of bad.
And I can understand the like the crossover in some ways. Well, some were like kind of half crossed over. You went to visit the same place. Like I think you get the Prot warrior weapon in the same place that you get the Prot paladin weapon, but it's different rooms and a bit of a different story, which was kind of
Yeah, I
nice.
don't remember
Like
those, but
reuse some of the assets. But when they were the same, the one that I hated most was the Scythe of Elune and maybe Demonology, where it was basically like some dude stole it, and you're like, ugh, and you just got to go
yeah.
find it. I think that is the F one
Yeah, or
as
yeah,
well.
I can't remember the affliction or the
Yeah, dude's like, I got it, it's
the
mine.
affliction
And
one
you're
had
like,
something to do with
whatever.
reaping of souls or whatever. Maybe the affliction one was better. Maybe it was the demo one where yeah, you all of a sudden you find the skull and he's like, oh, you found my head, and he just starts talking to you. And you're like, okay. Um,
Oh, Vandy says it's Tyr Temple and Tirisfal. That's where it was. Is that whole thing.
Yeah, that was
I
it. I
like
mean,
I like that.
expanding on Tyr's lore or whatever, yeah, was kind of cool. Like having that in
That was
clones
cool.
and
I
the
like that it took you to vanilla
well,
like
that was
area.
something they did a
It made it
great
feel like it
job.
was a full
Yeah,
world.
I
Yeah.
love that they're pushing you out into the world because that was one of the failings of Dreadnought was
Yes.
you lived in your garrison until you raided, and that was all you
Yes,
did. As we're
exactly.
now, we're on Darkshore, we're sitting here watching the world tree burn because
Yeah.
the storyline, the narrative they have formed
And
has
the
brought
world's
us.
evolving. I mean, it's been
Yeah, well, I
years.
mean, since Cataclysm, there really hasn't been a reason to go anywhere but the new continent. So, like, the fact that the world quest system like allows you to do stuff throughout the world, and they're forcing the lore to kind of go back because these places still exist, these people still exist, and with the scaling and stuff, it's actually relevant again to an extent.
Yeah,
So
I think it's
that's a
cool.
cool thing that came out of this expansion, and I hope to see more
I
of that
I
as we
love that.
progress through
Me
BFA.
too. Me too. Me too. All right. In summation here, if you had to pick, this is so hard, and I know I have a lot, so I'll just share a couple highlights for me. But
Yeah, I was
your
gonna say
favorite best things of
Yeah, I was gonna
Legion.
ask best, worst, and what are you looking forward to? I think is the best way to round it
Ooh.
up. What do you think the biggest success, biggest failure, and what are you hyped about that's new?
Okay, so for me, best. Oh, that's so hard.
Yeah, I don't have
Um,
one, so you can throw out multiple too. But
yeah, let me try. Let me try. Some good things I really, really liked. Okay, and this is coming out of nowhere. I loved the Karazhan, and I will tell you why. I loved. I it kind of harkened back to that 10-man raid experience. Only it was still a 5-man, but it was difficult
it was a
content.
five
Like when
man
we
raid when it came out for all
It
intents and
was. It
purposes.
was. And I loved that because sometimes it's hard, for some people, to get their whole guild together to raid or whatever. It felt a little more bite-sized, yet the challenge was still there.
And
Mechanically, it was
throwing Nightbane
difficult.
Mount in there, where there's like a challenge mode,
Oh,
was brilliant
oh,
because
so good. So
it
good.
was nostalgic for people like me that played that in
Oh,
BC,
yeah,
but it
absolutely.
brought people that never got to experience that a reason to go back.
Hmm.
It was yeah, that
Hmm.
was one I was thinking of, but
It,
that was great. That I
yeah,
definitely agree with you on
yeah.
that.
Definitely primo stuff. We had mentioned the night hold. That was on a
Yep,
list for
yep,
me of just like that whole thing from start to finish felt good.
phenomenal raid.
And I will put, yeah, really loved it. And then for me, I think the top of it all um, has to be Shadow Priest. I haven't casted before. I'm a paladin boy forever, like literally. My first tune was a hunter, and then when I came back, I played paladin forever. Melee, I just like doing ret. I did holy for a while, and then back to ret, and then so once I changed over to horde to join, the guild and goof around with you guys, um, I switched to Shadow Priest, and that ended up being so fun. Legion Shadow Priest is so fun. The kind of learning curve, the risk and reward system of like you, especially surrender, like kind of boiled everything about Shadow Priest into one talent, which was cool for me. Whereas, like, if you can do this well, if you can plan ahead, if you're thinking on your feet, if you're thinking 40 seconds ahead and how you need to move, where you need to be, how long can you stay on Void Form, how many stacks can you get, was so fun to me. That mini game within the raid was so fun.
Yeah.
I loved that. Loved Shadow Priest and Legion, and then I could talk a little bit more about BFA Shadow Priest, but we won't yet.
Okay. Yeah.
But those are my
Yeah, as an
bests.
old school
Let me.
player, Priest for me is always holy, so I didn't play Shadow much this expansion, but I kind of wish, like, I'd heard a lot of good things about its playstyle and, like, it's fun, so that's something I wish I had done a little more of just to see and
Yeah,
experience, but I liked my Warlock,
yeah. You
so
just got to watch. You just got to watch me be so good at Shadow
the
Priest.
best.
So good. Best Shadow Priest NA. Ay ay ay. Well, so while I think of my worsts, you got some
Yeah,
goods?
yeah. I
Any other
mean,
goods?
like the things that like they're the obvious, but I think it's always worth mentioning to give credit where credit's due. The rating's always good. We talked a lot about that, and especially Nighthold. The art is phenomenal. We kind of mentioned about the different aesthetic looks,
Mm,
raid tier and stuff, but I think the art team always
uh-huh.
deserves like massive props. There was some really cool armor that came out of this expansion. The world felt
Hmm.
good. The reskins, the new allied races, like all that stuff looks great. Like I
Yeah.
said before, I love Blizzard's willingness to take a chance, which isn't necessarily like a thing, but like they tried some new stuff with the legendary system. The artifact weapon had its successes, had its failures. We're gonna see a different version of it with the neck piece, which I think is gonna be good. But it was interesting. It
Hmm.
was new. It was interesting for a while, and I really loved it early. because you had to make choices about where you're going to spend
Yes.
your points, and that felt really good at the beginning of the expansion.
Yeah. Before it just became a
Yeah,
dump,
yeah.
but
Then
it
it became
definitely was
yeah farm,
cool.
but it still gave you a reason to do stuff, and I liked that aspect of
Yeah.
it. I liked the release
Yeah.
cadence, and the number of raids and stuff. I really liked that. The story was
Every
compelling. The
77
class
days.
identity,
Yeah.
the world quest implementation instead of just doing dailies. I thought the world quest idea was really interesting. But for me, the
Hmm.
two things that stood out, like after I've said this long list of things, the two things that
Yeah.
stood out for me was Mythic Plus again. I thought was brilliant because it gave you a reason to
Hmm.
continue to do five mans. It was really
Yes.
challenging. It was unique and it was infinitely scaling. So you could never complain that everything was too easy because you could make it as hard as you wanted and as hard as you pushed. And the other thing that I really appreciated, and as a warlock, I really liked it, was Mage Towers. Because back in the day, the Green Flame Challenge was something unique to warlocks that I loved, and it was super fucking hard. It was something cool, and then you had something you could show off in the world, but it didn't increase your damage or anything. It was just, hey, I've got green flames now. That means that you went and did this crazy quest chain with this really hard scenario, and having the Mage Tower available for all the specs. Even though I like in my brain, I wish everyone was unique and specific to the spec. I understand the
Yes.
absolute burden that would have been, but
Oh
I
man.
love the fact like yeah,
36.
the
Yeah.
fact that, that came out, like I thought that was really cool because again, it didn't affect your damage at all, but you could see who the good players were and who the bad players, and it was a
Yeah.
personal thing. Like if like our raid could be on fire, our guild could be hating each other, everyone could suck ass, but I could walk in by myself, and if I completed the mage tower, it was because I was good or because I sucked. But is the reason I
Yeah.
didn't do it. I did. You couldn't blame
Right.
anyone else. You couldn't complain about anyone else. It was a personal challenge that provided you a
I love
sense of
that.
pride. And like I farmed out and just crushed my dick until I got the destruction one on the very first mage tower. I had zero legendaries going into it.
You did.
I
It was
didn't have a
insane.
full artifact weapon. I was sub 900 item level. Like I went in there like an asshole, and I just did it over and over and over, and I got it as one of like the first however many in the world to get it, and then walking around with that for that first little bit felt so
Yeah,
cool.
you were powerful. There's no
Yeah.
doubt. That
And
was cool. I forgot. I didn't
I
even mention
loved
that.
that, and I hope like I don't think that needs to be something that happens every expansion, but I would love to see little things like that where there's personal challenges that reward you for understanding your class and being able to do something mechanically that isn't necessarily like I guess it kind of existed in the proving grounds, but the proving grounds was done so poorly where all it was get
Yeah.
your silver and you can queue for heroics, and then like there
It's
was
it's
no
it's
reason
memey
there
almost, you
was no
know.
reason to go above and beyond it. So it was something they tried and failed, but I think the implementation of the way the mage tower with like a transmog appearance or whatever was brilliant, and I really loved that Blizzard did that.
Yeah, me too. All right, I have my
Okay,
worsts. Are you
go
ready?
for it.
Okay, I have one that's pretty petty, one that I think is also petty, and then one that's like I think
Okay.
legitimate. Okay. First petty thing, Coven. Hated it. Just hated it. I like the fight on normal. Let me say that. Let me say heroic Coven. But even on LFR Coven, no LFR, not LFR Coven. Even on normal Coven, some pug groups were challenged by that. I thought normal Coven though was about where heroic should have been. Honestly, yeah, so heroic Coven just felt bad to me, and maybe that's just a personal slight because our guild had trouble with it and it was just horrible. But I didn't like the design. I really didn't like it. So if I'm picking on one boss that I decide I hate this boss, it's going to be Coven. The other petty thing that I've got is super petty, and I just forgot it. I should have wrote it down. The other thing that I'll jump to the other one. Uh, breaching the tomb. That was a disappointment,
Yes.
obviously, and sort of a pattern of I'm thinking in the grander scheme, the pre-launch event for Legion was awesome. And now we're looking at this pre-launch event as being kind of like lackluster in comparison, which I think, it's comparing apples to oranges
Yeah.
in some ways. But at the same time, like this pattern of like Suramar was so cool, leading you into that. Even Emerald Nightmare came straight out of, the questing experience in
Yep.
Val'sharah, and Stormheim you went right into Trial. Nighthold was amazing, where you were advancing into Suramar and every week doing something that literally was bringing you closer and making actual progress into it. And so we were all, I remember how excited we were for that tomb to open
Yeah,
up. We were going to breach the tomb, breach the tomb. And then it ended up just being a useless, like, weekly quest
yeah.
every week. One week,
Bring a
what
bunch
was
of
it?
crystals to
What?
Khadgar, and then he gives you all but one
Uh,
back, and he makes dumb dad joke along the
which
way, which
was
was
which
so
was a funny
disappointing.
joke in Draenor, and this was a little bit silly, but like,
Go
oh
find
yeah, that
rares
was
and kill a bunch
terrible.
of rares that don't spawn on
I
a fast enough
know.
thing. Do some world quests. It was like, we're not doing anything meaningful. You're just biding your time. Yeah, that felt bad.
I know it was the WoW equivalent of busy work, where it's like engage in this content
Yeah.
because we
I
want you
would
to,
rather it
you know.
not be there and they just have a release date than be forced to
Me too.
do those dumb
Me too.
chores that felt unfulfilling. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
A- Absolutely, it was bad. I'll try and think of my other petty one while you go. Do you got
Yeah, for
anything?
me, I mean, as a triple DPS spec class, like I guess this probably wasn't a big deal
Hmm.
for you as Shadow Priest, but one thing I didn't like was the flexibility as a warlock. This expansion, when you talk to people, you were either a destruction warlock, an affliction warlock, or a demonology warlock. Because legendaries, like we said before, because of the different artifact weapons and having to do like a dump of stuff, it was basically like if you chose to do one of the specs and then they did their balance patch partway through, changed legendaries, changed tuning, changed whatever, it was incredibly difficult to be like, oh shit, Demo just got blown up. I need to switch to destruction or affliction. And if you could do it, but you were majorly behind. And I
Hmm.
didn't like the how once you kind of chose a lane, you were stuck in it. Um, and that's one of the things I'm looking forward to in BFA because with the neck piece, you can just swap specs and it applies across the board. So I'm really looking forward to being able to be a little more diversified in that. And I didn't like how, like, while I love Destruction throughout the entirety of the expansion, if I had chosen to go Mythic, I would have had to play Affliction. And that would have been
Hmm.
impossible for various points in time throughout the expansion because Affliction was just inherently behind as a
Yeah.
result. Narrative wise, yeah, I had some stuff that I didn't love. And I didn't love the other thing that I'd say I really didn't like. And it wasn't one thing in general, but like again, it's weird to say, but I didn't love the RNG of this expansion. Not necessarily that I don't love RNG, because again, that's
It was
it's
the
it's
amount of it.
essential.
It seemed like
Well,
every
well, no,
system
like
was
well, so
RNG.
like the legendaries. Do you
Hmm.
get a good one? Do you get one at all? You know, so much RNG
Hmm.
that made a huge impact on your gameplay. And then those dumb.
Titan
Well, yeah,
forging.
Titan forging, War forging.
That's a whole thing.
That was the
Ugh.
problem. And then like the catch up vendors, um, where they had old loot, like the fucking Arcano crystal is still I think best in slot, and I have not gotten a single one on this character. This entire expansion, but I've spent like every one of those damn veiled Argonites on nothing but trinkets. And so if I got a 910, it probably would still beat the 935 I have equipped right now.
Yeah.
And if it were to Warforge or Titan Forge, then it's even better. So like that respect, like of RNG or whatever, where it literally you look at the like you can't even look at the top like 10 Warlock parses on any given spec because you look at their gear and you're like, oh, that asshole has a 940 Arcano crystal. Of course he's
Yeah,
doing
exactly.
like you literally could make or break a person's DPS based on whether they got lucky with a roll. Which
Yeah.
that drove me crazy because that went away from what I was talking about where I loved where like the legendaries interacted and you had a huge parse because you played well. There was some
Yeah.
aspects where like legitimately, did you get lucky? Yep, cool, your DPS is good. Did you not get lucky? Same thing with destruction again. The destruction mastery, which unfortunately is not changing, is hey, you have a chance up to whatever your mastery percentage is to do extra damage.
Yeah,
That's
that's kind of
stupid.
rough.
I fucking hate that.
That's,
Um,
yeah,
I don't mind RNG
that's
loot. I
kind of
don't
rough.
mind RNG mounts. I don't mind certain degrees of RNG. That's essential to an
Yeah.
MMO. But when it gimps your ability to do certain things, and some people are just inherently going to crush you, even if they are the worst player in the world, because they got lucky, that feels bad.
Yeah, that certainly is true. I remember my other petty thing.
Okay.
Uh, I did not mind how we said goodbye to the artifacts. I thought that was kind of a cool little
Yep.
progression where we were like, man, the sword. The only thing that I'm upset about is that pre-patch rolled around, and then the only thing we got was just like your artifact was just like gray. You know, you're like you open it up and it's like, yeah, it was sacrificed to Sargeras. Whereas like it didn't feel like a part of the quest with Magni was like, oh man, your artifacts are going to be surging with power until eventually they'll just have to burn out or whatever. And it felt bad, especially for, and I'm gonna say like hunters. Like they did enough class storytelling that I wish they could have dedicated one person to write a small little quest about saying goodbye to Hottie or whatever, just because like we bonded over these things for so long, and it was just such an unceremonious like, and they're
Well,
dead. Go
yeah.
get a better piece of gear in the world quest over there in the Dark
Yeah,
Shore
I
or
think they
whatever.
said in the Q&A, Hottie's not done, so I think they're going to try to find a way to revive it for the people that love it. But yeah, that was kind of weird. How cool would it have been if there was one quest when you come when
Yeah,
so they did their big pre-patch thing, right? Which obviously didn't go
right.
well with that initial launch.
But they should have
But
had one
well,
quest that
if
first
there was
week.
one quest to go talk to Magni again, you can still gray it out, but like have it like all like electrified or something weird, and you talk to him and you're like
Right.
something's going wrong, and he's like, "Laddie, I'm sorry, you drew the power out or whatever," and
Yeah.
like it seems like it's burnt out, and then there's like a cutscene where like it shatters or something like that, and then now it goes gray or whatever on your display, and like the power could be gimped, so it's not like, oh, if I don't talk to Magni, I've got the power, but have a quest that's just like purely aesthetic where you go and it changes like the appearance from like having lightning around it to like graying out or something like that, and then it explains like,
Right.
because that was cool where they had the increasing power level every day, where
I thought that
where
was
it
so
made people
cool.
push
That was
like
so
crazy
cool.
high mythic pluses. If you're still trying to get your mage
Yeah.
tower, if you're trying to get your AOTC, like you got a
That was
little better
fun.
every day, and that was great. But yeah, then all of a sudden it was just like, oh, we're done, and there was like all you needed was like a 2 minute cutscene or a talk with Magni to explain. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
overloaded with power. You sucked it out, and now all of a sudden it overloaded, and it seems to have like burned itself out
Yeah.
or something like that.
And the greater implications of that for me, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, is like a small little piece of storytelling like that goes a long, long way for me personally. So I'm just, if I have some skepticism moving forward, even just based off of some of the storytelling and quest writing of the War of Thorns, has been like, "Oh, I hope we don't have a lot of that. Just like, yeah, didn't even think about it or didn't care. It seems like, rather than focusing on the big moves, like the little stuff is
Yeah.
important, I think.
Well,
But
yeah, I
that's
mean,
just for
it's in
me.
the details, and that's where it feels like immersive, as it
Yeah.
feels like it makes you feel a part of the world versus, hey, I'm just doing a quest.
Yeah, right. That was pretty
Yeah. So the
comprehensive
last one, looking forward to. So
coverage.
like going into BFA for me,
Oh yeah.
what I'm really interested in and what I'm skeptical about. I'm excited about Mythic Pluses to see how it goes, and I think it's going to play out. I'm excited to see where we go raid tier wise, and I'm excited slash terrified to see what they're going to do with the story. The one thing I'm concerned
Yeah.
about is the Azerite skills, and I think you touched on it briefly, but I'm curious to
Yeah.
see will it fill the void of legendaries and tier sets, because what I've seen so far,
Yeah.
they do not feel good. They're all
Yeah.
passive, and they're all kind of shit. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm really hoping that's just because we haven't reached a quote unquote tier raid, and so the second raid like stuff and the Mythic Plus stuff at that point is going to have way more impactful and interactive stuff. But nothing in the Azerite pieces that's on beta that I have seen thus far changes your gameplay. So I'm afraid the things are going to
Yeah.
get very stale. And along those lines, I'm
Yeah.
afraid of no feeling of progression because there's no new talents here. Like all you're
Right.
doing is just pumping a bunch of shit into a necklace that will allow you to
Right.
unlock the stuff on your pieces that again I've said don't feel rewarding. So
Looks like
I'm
passive
worried
stuff.
that it's
Yeah.
going to be like you're playing the same thing the entire expansion and people are going to get incredibly bored because nothing
Yeah.
changes from day one to day last.
Right. I'd say the same things. I'm excited for Mythic Plus to see how that goes. I had a good time doing that. I was excited about it from the get-go, doing Mythic Dungeons like from Legion, and I think it's been awesome. You've done a lot more than I have, but I think it's been a super fun way to do five bands. Uh, if I'm a little excited and concerned about old gods in general, I like old gods. I'm just a shadow priest loving my old god stuff. But like, I'm excited for that storytelling, but I'm also concerned about it. I don't really want to pivot to old gods after this whole battle for Azeroth, like faction war stuff. I'm hoping that they'll kind of lean heavy into that and we'll tell some seriously good faction
Well,
story
and that
going on.
that's
Or like I was looking even at like Wrathgate and some of that cool stuff where like in Ice Crown Citadel, it was still a very much Horde expedition and Alliance expedition where there was a lot of grindy, bad feelings between the two factions still, between Varian and Muradin, not Muradin, yeah, Muradin, and Sourfang and some of the other dudes, you know, where it was like we're still doing this together, but we're also so very separate and still hate each other. You know, like I want to see that make have some really real lasting effects. Don't say you're going to do a faction war and not like go
Uh,
for it, lean
and that's
into
that's
it.
where the storytelling comes in. Like I said, I'm concerned but excited because I honestly like what the craziest thing they could do is not have old gods.
Yeah,
Like and actually
yeah,
have the entire expansion be about a conflict between the Horde and the Alliance. I think that would
yeah.
throw people
That
off.
would be
People would be a
cool.
little disappointed, but I think in the end it would actually play out
I
because
don't
if we
think
just
so.
pivot to old gods in Raid 3 after Ajara and
Right.
there's no real logic behind it, it's going to feel weird. So the way they tell
Yeah.
their story is going to make or break the lore aspect. That's weird to say. The story is going to make or break the lore, but honestly, they could do some really good things, or they could completely fuck it up and make it feel bad.
Yeah. So I'm a little hesitant. There's so much we don't know
Yeah.
about it that I'm hoping for the
Well,
best.
speculation's
But
fun, but yeah,
same,
all we got to do is play, and
yeah,
it's in their hands. They're gonna do what they're gonna do, and we're
exactly.
just gonna experience it.
Exactly.
It's not like we're not gonna play, right?
And right, you might like the story, you might not. But so, and the thing I'm concerned about is the same thing as you. I want to see variety in my playstyle. I want to see my playstyle change. I want to see, some complexity in the fights and rotations. I'm switching specs because of, um, you know, Shadow's gotten a lot more boring to me, and so I'm actually going to another boring spec because I might as well just play BM Hunter if I'm going to play Shadow Priest. But nevertheless, that's kind of my thing. I'm concerned that, and I know Ian keeps reassuring us that there's better pieces coming and it's really going to affect how you play and whatnot. But
We'll see. We'll see. I mean, like
yeah, we will.
Blizzard, they know their audience. They know the expectations. We're not the first persons or people to say this, so it's not like it's not on their radar. So all we can do is give them the benefit of the doubt, and then if they
Yes.
blow it up, then we have every reason to be upset. But like, just sit
Yeah.
back and hope that they've got a plan, and
Yeah.
just enjoy the ride as we go.
We can have a whole episode about our predictions and
Yeah.
thoughts for BFA. But for our last thing, I think before we go here, last final question of no consequence whatsoever. The allied race that you would like to see added to the game is.
Without a question, without a doubt, without a hesitation, Eridar. I want to play. I want to play as like the corrupted Eridar, like demon people.
Oh, dude, that is so, so good. So, so good. I would 100% support that.
Yeah.
100% support that.
As my
I,
warlock side, like.
yeah, yeah, yep, I get that. What would I add? Probably definitely. Actually, you know what I would thought
A
they were going to do
living
and I was excited
tentacle.
about? Yeah. Just want to be a tentacle. Just one tentacle. No, I thought the ethereals would have been really
Yeah, I've
cool.
heard a lot of people say that. I think that'd be interesting. The artwork on those guys is
Yeah.
incredible, so that'd be fun.
Or the
They'd have to be a
honestly,
neutral
don't
fashion
make
though,
fun of
right? Like
me.
a Pandaren, like because the
The Tortolan look cool
dude
to me
Potato
too.
loves Tortolan. He wants to play a Tortolan.
Oh yeah, it'd be fun. Sweet. All right. Well, I think that's gonna wrap it up in our big long kind of recap here of Legion for our
We only
first
went like double the
episode.
time you wanted to, so we're doing pretty good.
I figured we would. I was like, we could talk about this forever, and we can cut down the after. But nevertheless, this was fun. We'll see what topics come up in the future. Let's just do a quick recap and see how many fish I caught. I've caught 500 fish achievements since I started doing this, and there's a lot of fish
I'm
here.
on a
One small chest.
catch and release program where I never click on it, so I'm just saving the environment here. But
61 raw rainbow fin
there you
albacore.
go.
20 grouper. Actually, I have a few stacks of that. 20, 40, 60, 80, 90 grouper, 40 slither skin mackerels, and 20 oily blackmouth.
Nice.
How about that?